They say kings are made of iron and gold. The truth is, they are made of fear. In the 14th year of the reign of King Alaric IV, a winter colder than memory swept over the hills of the kingdom of Velmorn. The rivers stiffened into glass, the forests stood like armies of frozen spears, and the breath of men turned to frost before their lips could speak mercy. But it was not the cold that would be remembered. It was the scream. It began as horror often does, with silence. The king, a man both beloved and feared, had not left his chambers for 6 nights. He dismissed his council, silenced his court musicians, and forbade the lighting of candles past the second bell. Rumors, like worms in the dark, crawled beneath the walls of the palace, that he had seen something in his sleep, that he had not truly awoken since. At first it was dismissed. Kings have nightmares, what of it? But then came the command. Bring me the map of Verith Hollow. The steward, pale as moon milk, dared to question sire. Verith Hollow is no more than a shepherd's village. Barely 24 souls. Bring it, the king said again, though his eyes did not seem to see the room. They brought the map. His finger trembled as he pressed it against the inked valley nestled between black pines and broken rock. There, he whispered. It is there. What followed was decree. By sunfall, 300 royal soldiers rode east with one command. No voice shall rise again from Verith Hollow. No smoke shall curl. No footstep echo. None. What madness can grip a man with such force that he condemns the innocent to earth in silence? A woman, the queen's seamstress, said she saw him the night before, standing at the edge of the tower, speaking to no one, as though reciting prayers in reverse. But those who questioned disappeared. Those who whispered found their tongues heavy with regret. You must understand, this was not a king without virtue. Alaric IV had once wept over the corpse of a traitor, whispering, "If only I had been kinder sooner." He had given gold to orphan houses and knelt before plague victims, as though their rot could not touch him. But something had changed. They arrived in Verith Hollow on the 3rd night. There were 23 villager shepherds, widows, 2 blind sisters, who sang to each other across the fields, and a boy who claimed to speak to crows. The commander, Sir Melon, delivered the order without a tremble in his voice. Yet his eyes, those were the eyes of a man who had once seen children burn in the siege of Braxmere and never quite looked away. They were not killed with blades. That would have been too merciful. Instead, pits were dug. Deep, dark, and narrow, like the throat of the earth swallowing sin. One by one, the villagers were forced inside. Some wept. Others stared without sound, as if even protests had no meaning here. The blind sisters held hands and sang until the soil reached their mouths. The boy with the crows laughed loud and long and strange until silence came for him too. The final pit was sealed under moonlight. No prayers were uttered. No names carved. The snow fell as if to bury the memory itself, and yet memory has claws. Back at the palace, the king did not sleep. He sat in his chamber, staring at the hearth, as if it might whisper forgiveness. When the steward dared to ask, "Sire, may we now rest from this command?" the king looked up and said, "It still walks." What walks? What had he seen in the shadows of his mind that terrified him more than his own guilt? He did not answer. But that night the castle dogs howled, and in the morning the stables were red. Not with blood, with soil. Dark, wet earth, as though something had risen. They found the first sign at dawn, a trail of blackened soil, as though a grave had cracked open and spilled its marrow across stone. It led from the eastern edge of the palace gardens to the statue of St. Elin, where moss grew like old blood down his cheeks. The statue's eyes had been gouged out in the night. No blade had touched them. Stone had simply crumbled, 2 perfect hollows where sight had once been. The gardeners crossed themselves. One refused to speak again, whispering only to the leaves. The king said nothing. He walked the hall like a man hunted by silence itself, pausing in front of mirrors and tapestries, as if expecting them to whisper his name. In his throne room, he summoned a monk, a scribe, once loyal to the forbidden archives, and bade him write a record, though no one else was allowed to hear. What was written in that hour is lost. The monk's body was later found with ink still wet on his fingers and his tongue chewed clean through. All we know is this. The king spoke of a figure without eyes, draped in soil, and shadow, who came to him each night and whispered of roots beneath the skin, of songs sung backwards, of a curse not broken by time or mercy, said. The dream began 2 weeks before the slaughter. In it, he stood in a valley of bones. The sky was a velvet throat, and from the dirt rose children, not screaming, but humming a sound not of grief, but of memory. A lullaby he could not remember learning. The figure came forward, then neither man nor woman, head bent, no mouth, no nose, only a face smooth as untouched wax, except for the eyes. Where the eyes should have been was soil, packed deep, wet, and writhing with roots. The king tried to run, but his feet had already grown roots of their own. He awoke screaming, and on the morning after he gave the order. That dream returned each night, louder, closer, so he buried them. But he did not bury the dream. Now his sleep is broken by whispering beneath the floorboards. He tears apart the rugs, his tears at the planks. Guards beg him to stop. Ministers flee the court. He claws the stone in his chambers, saying, "There's something underneath." One night a guard named Verhan dared to defy him, a man of honor, scarred from 3 wars, and once held as the king's personal shield-bearer. Verhan said, "My king, what you saw was a shadow of guilt. But you cannot bury memory like bodies. You are not God." The king's reply was quiet. "I am not God, but I was chosen." That night, Verhan was locked in the East Tower. When they checked the cell by dawn, he was gone, not escaped gone. Escaped gone, nothing remained but his armor and in his helm. A fistful of wet earth, still warm. The queen fled the next morning. They say she left barefoot, hair unbound, muttering the names of the blind sisters. She had embroidered their names once, long ago, on linen given to her by the village as a coronation gift. No one ever found her. But weeks later, 3 crows appeared at the palace. They nested on the spire above the king's bedchamber, watching. Always watching. He ordered them shot, burned, poisoned. They returned, and with them came the voices. Not outside. Beneath, the floor trembled. The bricks wept. One of the guards reported hearing lullabies soft and childlike rising through the marble. Another swore he saw a finger reach through the cracks in the stone. Not bone, not skin. Wood, like a root, he whispered, before biting off his own thumb. The king now walks barefoot. He says it is the only way to feel where the earth pulses beneath the halls. No longer speaks to his council. He speaks only to the soil, and the words he mutters cannot be translated. They belong to no tongue remembered by man. But perhaps they were remembered by the land of Verith Hollow, buried but not forgiven. Years passed. The world turned. Kingdoms rose and fell like waves on a tide of forgetfulness. But Velmorn remained untouched, unspeaking, unforsaken. Children born in the villages beyond its reach were warned. Do not follow the crows. Still some did. Drawn by dreams they could not explain, by whispers carried in the bark of trees, by lullabies they never learned, but somehow knew, many never returned. Those who did were different. Their eyes blinked too slowly. Their mouths moved in silence. One girl, no older than 12, sat by the edge of her family's hearth for weeks and whispered only one phrase, over and over, "He is still dreaming." No one knew who she meant. But the truth is Velmorn had not slept. Not since the king stepped into the dark. It was the crows that returned first. By then, no one dared to count them. They blanketed the rooftops, the trees, the roads that led to the forgotten palace. Not a caw among them. Just silence. Thick, watchful silence. Then the doors opened. No one touched them. No one dared. But the gates to Velmorn creaked wide one twilight, and the smell of fresh earth spilled out like perfume from a buried cathedral. It was a merchant who first approached, drunk and bitter, muttering that kings and ghosts were equally worthless. He crossed the threshold, laughed, spat, cursed the name of Alaric IV. They found his body the next morning, seated upright on the throne. Eyes missing. Mouth sewn shut with root. Fingertips buried in the stone armrest, as though trying to become the marble. But the crows did not touch him. They only watched. In time, scholars grew curious. Always the same mistake. They called it historical interest, folklore, myth-made matter. They entered Velmorn in search of truth. They found something older. The pit remained. Still it breathed. Some said it glowed in moonlight. Others said it whispered only to those who had taken life. One man, a former war captain, fell to his knees beside it and screamed for forgiveness. He was not seen again. But they say grass never grew where he had wept. Then, one autumn, a figure emerged, not from the road, but from the soil. He rose slowly in the courtyard, tattered robes of crimson and ash, hair long and matted with leaves, and in his hands, a crown, not of gold, not of iron, but of bone and root, twisted into a cruel geometry no man could forge. It was him, Alaric, but not as he had been. His eyes were black as the pit, rimmed in red, and his mouth moved without sound, like someone still speaking in dreams. He did not address the people. He addressed the earth. He walked barefoot through every chamber, trailing soil like incense. Where he stepped, stone softened. Where he paused, moss bloomed. Behind him, the crows followed, not flying, walking, and the air grew thick, not foul, but heavy like the moment before a thunderclap or a scream withheld. He reached the throne room, placed the crown of root upon the stone, then turned and smiled. That was the last anyone saw of him. The next morning, the castle was gone, not destroyed. Gone. Where the palace had stood for centuries, there now lay only forest, ancient, silent, and at its center, a single hill ringed with 13 black trees and 1 stones, mall unmarked. No birds sing there. But sometimes, if you press your ear to the ground, you may hear a hum, low, steady. And if you listen too long, you'll start to hear words. Words not meant for daylight. Words that remember the soil, the scream, the curse, and the king who dreamed too deep. They say he never woke. They say the dream goes on. And if the earth still breathes, it breathes through him. It's forever crowned. Forever buried. But never, ever forgotten. There was an old belief, whispered only in corners of ancient monasteries, that the earth remembers every drop of blood it drinks. Some thought it poetry, but to the king it was prophecy. He no longer wore his crown. It lay untouched in a basin of ash beside his bed, blackened from some unknown fire. His robes had grown tattered, stiff with soil, and his nails were chipped from clawing at stone. The royal scribes refused to record his words, saying, "He speaks like one who has swallowed the wind from a grave." And yet he wrote dozens of scrolls, hundreds of pages, all burned. The last minister loyal to him, a frail man named Laurent, begged him, "Please, your grace, let us bring the priests of Saint Ilvan. Let them cleanse this place. Let them pray." The king turned to him, eyes black-ringed, voice cracked. Prayer does not reach what lies beneath. That same night the castle chapel collapsed. No storm, no fire, no saboteur. The stone simply sank mass, though the earth beneath it had opened its mouth and swallowed the building whole. The ground quaked for only one breath, and silence, thick, wet, final. Only one priest was inside. His hands were later found 20 paces apart. After that, the servants began to leave in droves, not from fear of the king, but of what was beneath him. They said the walls now sweated, the candles melted without flame, that sometimes in the depth of night, footsteps echoed not above, but below deep, rhythmic, like a slow dance in a hollow place. The only ones who remained were the mute and the mad. And the crows, they multiplied. No longer 3, now 9, then 13, then 21. Roosting along the palace spires, watching the king's balcony, silent still. Every morning more appeared. No one could shoot them. No one dared. One soldier tried. His arrow turned in air and struck his own eye. He died screaming that he heard roots growing in his skull. The king took it as a sign. He summoned the palace gravediggers and ordered a pit to be dug in the great hall itself. "Dig until the stone bleeds," he said. They dug. 6 men. 2 died within the first hour heart failure, the physician said. But their eyes were wide, black, staring. The others continued. The pit grew wider, deeper. The marble cracked like old bone, and then they found it. Wood, but not wood that had ever known forest. Pale, smooth, pulsing with faint warmth. A door sealed without hinges. The king fell to his knees. He whispered in a tongue that did not sound like speech, but like something older than breath, and the door opened. Inside was only darkness. No steps, no ladder, just a drop, black and still. King descended. Not with rope, not with help. He simply stepped in, was gone. No sound, no scream. Only the crows stirred. Laurent, the last minister, waited by the pit for 3 days. On the fourth, the soil around the edges began to rise, not fall, as though breathing, as though something beneath had awakened, not from slumber, but from waiting. He ran, he told no one. But before he left the castle for good, he passed through the king's chamber one last time. There, in the dust beside the ash basin crown, he found a single sentence etched into the stone wall by finger. They do not sleep where no prayer reaches. The palace was abandoned. The kingdom without a sovereign. And for 10 years, no one entered the grounds of Velmorn Keep. Grass grew high in the throne room. Ivy strangled the old bell tower, but the pit remained open. And from it came a faint sound, day and night. Not wind, not whisper, but humming. A child's lullaby, sung backwards.